Hi everyone, this is Dr. Steele, and I wanted to review the worksheet called Confronting Dysfunctional Beliefs. And as we have talked about cognitive therapy, it's based on the premise that the individual is having thoughts that basically are distorted, non-productive, that are continuously causing them to end up in the same place. As I've mentioned before, if you have negative thoughts, you're going to have negative emotions, and your behavior is going to reflect that. And so having distorted thoughts is extremely difficult for people, and we want to move people in a way that their thoughts are more godly. Their thoughts are more in line with the truths of the Bible, and the way that we do that is confronting those dysfunctional thoughts. So this handout has 20 questions to challenge negative thoughts, and the first question, that is probably the biggest question, and a great question to ask people who are coming to you for counseling, is when they say something and, you know, to them it's truth, and they want to share this truth with you, and you want to try to understand what they're saying, but also this truth is keeping them stuck, keeping them in difficult relationships. And so a great question to ask them is, tell me the evidence. What is the evidence that you have that's leading you to these conclusions? And they're going to have some evidence, but also there may be other evidence that is available that they haven't thought about, and you can perhaps help them to think of other things that may be going on besides just jumping to the conclusions that they have jumped to, which brings us to the next question is, are you jumping to conclusions? Are you taking just certain information and you're creating truth out of it without really looking at the big picture? What else might be going on that you haven't thought about yet? And you know, it's a way of thinking that we all have. I mean, you know, we know what we know, and as a counselor, you want to try to help expand what that person knows. And so that they can come to different, more productive conclusions. And then another great question to ask is, what are the alternatives to the way that you're thinking? This is a great way to help them see their situation perhaps differently, and that they may even ask the question like, okay, if you were talking to a really good friend of yours, would you be thinking the same thing? Would this be true if your friend was thinking it? What would your really good friend possibly be thinking that's different than what you're thinking? And this helps them to get out of the middle of their situation and kind of see it more as an observer, which can be very helpful, because in essence, that's what you're doing, is you're looking at it from an observer perspective. And then another question would be, what is the effect of thinking the way that you do? You know, is it leading you and getting you to a better place? Are you going to be able to meet your goals by thinking this way? Are you going to be able to have your depression or your anxiety alleviated? Is this going to enhance the relationships that you have with God and other people? Okay, if the effect is negative, you may want to think about something different. And then the fifth question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of thinking this way? And you can actually kind of develop a little two lists, and one list is the advantages and the other list is the disadvantages. And when I do something like that with individuals, I usually will just take a piece of paper, Put advantages on the left-hand side, disadvantages on the right-hand side, and say, okay, tell me what are the advantages and disadvantages of thinking the way you're thinking. And then as they say something, then I'll say, okay, is that going to go for advantage or for disadvantage? And, actually kind of write down and keep the list for them. Or you could have them keep the list. Have them have the piece of paper and write it down and just talk it out with you. Okay, the next one, number 6, would be, are you asking questions that have no answers? And of course, if the person is basically stuck in, having these questions that, no one really has the answer for. Life is very complicated, and we're not going to have the answers for a lot of things. And if we help them to see that there really is no one answer, or there really is no good answer, then they, instead of asking that question, they may want to move on to something else that would not be such a waste of their time. Okay, number 7 is, what thinking errors are you making? People, generally speaking, if they think something's true, it's true. And so, basically you ask them, okay, what you're thinking and how you're feeling. It's non-productive. It's really got you stuck. So what is it that you might be thinking that may be an error? What's the possibility that that's happening? Or are you thinking in the sense that of black and white thinking, where there is no gray? And so if you have people who are very concrete thinkers, who have difficulty thinking in the gray, you may have to help them move them to that gray area. That there are some things in life that are relative, and of course there's some things in life that are absolute, and you got to differentiate between the two. Okay, and then number 8 I really like, is because I help people to basically start paying attention to the way that they're speaking. And if you notice that they're using words like always, never, no one, everything, nothing, I call them superlative words, that will get them in trouble, because nothing is always. And if they're using these words, they'll see that typically they need to change the wording to sometimes, every once in a while, now and then. And if they do that, that'll actually make them feel better, because they will see that it's not all the time. It's just at times. And then a lot of people, especially Christians, are really, really good at condemning themselves. And if something happens, or if they do something bad, and they do one thing, and then all of a sudden they decide that, well, because I did this one thing, I am a bad person. And they let one thing basically determine who they are. Maybe they've done something in the past, they've never been able to forgive themselves. And so they would always see themselves in light of that thing in the past. And they're not able to let go of it. And helping them to be able to let go of it in the same way that God has let go of it can be extremely helpful and freeing for them. Concentrating on your weaknesses and forgetting your strengths. A big part of counseling right now is actually called positive psychology. I like it. I like this approach because what it does is it says, you know what, when you get into a counseling session with somebody, it seems like they're just telling you their problems, and they're telling you how bad things are, and they're telling you how bad they are, or they're telling you how bad other people are. And so the idea with positive psychology is, you know what, let's start with the strengths. Let's find out what you're doing well. Let's find out what your strengths are, and let's utilize them to full potential as you're trying to move forward in a new direction. Okay, number 11 is, are you blaming yourself for something that's not really your fault? Especially, people who are prone to condemn themselves may also be very, self-blaming. As I mentioned before, a very difficult time forgiving themselves, letting themselves off the hook. and that may be that they have the sense that they deserve to be where they are, and helping them to see their identity in Christ, and helping them to see that themselves as God sees them can be very freeing. Are you taking things personally that have little or nothing to do with you? This is an important question. A lot of times when we're in relationships with others and they say negative things about us or to us, we take it as truth and we make it about ourselves. But by and large, my philosophy is, you know what comes out of your mouth is about you, what comes out of my mouth is about me. And if you're saying something that's not edifying, that is not constructive, then I'm going to let you keep it, and I'm not going to receive it. I'm not going to take it on as my truth. Are you expecting yourself to be perfect? And this is a good question, because a lot of people don't even realize that they may have grown up in a household, especially, people in their 50s, people from certain Asian cultures, really from any culture, but there's the family expectation is that you've got to, succeed in life. You have to become a doctor, you have to become a lawyer, which means you're going to have to do perfectly. Your schooling's going to have to be perfect. And so you've been given messages your entire life that you can't make any mistakes. And when you're in that place where that's your belief about yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult to not feel depressed when you do make mistakes. And so it's allowing the person to recognize, you know what, you've got to figure out a way to give yourself permission to make mistakes, because mistakes are a normal part of being alive. And then, are you using a double standard? Is the person, thinking that they've got to be doing everything perfectly, kind of like what I said before, but they would never have that expectation for their friends or for their other family members. And so it's kind of like you got to give yourself grace. If you're able to give other people grace, how come you're not able to give yourself that grace? What do you feel about God's grace and mercy? Do you, the person oftentimes, if they are condemning themselves, then they're also believing that perhaps God is a very condemning God, and so that would be a good thing to look at to see where they're at in their relationship with God. Are you only paying attention to the black side of things? And we all do this. We all have the tendency to, we see the negative and we don't see anything beyond that. We can't see all the positive things that are going on in life, but we just focus, and our mind seems to go back, back to that, one thing that happened that perhaps was distressing. And it's hard to get past that. Are you overestimating the chances of disaster? Another way of looking at this is people who catastrophize. They take a situation, it hadn't even happened, and all of a sudden it's a catastrophe, and they're living in that catastrophe. And then, are you exaggerating the importance of events? Again, taking an event that perhaps went south and making everything about that, and making that the determination of the person's future and even of their personhood. And then number 18, are you fretting about the things that ought to be instead of accepting and dealing with them as they are? A lot of people live in that ought. I ought to be, further along in my career. I ought to, have a better marriage than I have. They just say those types of things to themselves rather than accepting what is. And that's a huge thing for people to get to. But it also comes when they accept themselves as God accepts them. Okay, and then number 19, are you assuming you can do nothing to change your situation? A very futile mindset. And helping the person to see, okay, you're trying to change the other person. You're trying to change your environment. Let's focus on what you can change, which is yourself, and helping them to move in that direction. And then lastly, are you predicting the future instead of experimenting with it? And helping the individual to see where they might be predicting the future based on the past, but helping them to envision a future that's different than their past. What would that look like? Tell me about a time in the past when it did work out for you.